Okay. Let's try this again. You know, what I'm missing really is grass. I could go electric too. Unknown. Add Weedle. Wait. Yes, beyond these Pokemon. Feel like I have a solid team. Sure. No. I mean, Tantamount is kind of cool, but like, doesn't help none. Alright, Ivy. Bye-bye, Chikorita. He's not a fire type yet. Can't blame me because these Pokemon kind of suck. Okay, that's fine. Audible.
Of course, those points would be way more after the percentage bonuses from all his titles, so it was closer to 150 in any stat he wanted. He opened his status screen to see how it was beginning to look after many weeks of alchemy. Status: Name, Jake Thane. Race, Human. E, level 95. Class, Ambitious Hunter, level 99. Profession, Prodigious Alchemist of the Malefic Viper, level 92. Health points, 13,068 of 13,150. Mana points, 3,841 of 15,637. Stamina, 7,014 of 9,930. Stats: Strength, 855. Agility, 1,172. Endurance, 993. Vitality, 1,315. Toughness, 840. Wisdom, 1,251. Intelligence, 640. Perception, 2,234. Willpower, 926. Free points, 90. Titles: Forerunner of the New World, Bloodline Patriarch, holder of a Primordial's True Blessing, Dungeoneer 5, Dungeon Pioneer 5, Legendary Prodigy, Prodigious Slayer of the Mighty, Kingslayer, Nobility, Earl, Progenitor of the 93rd Universe. Class skills: Basic One-Handed Weapons, Inferior. Advanced Stealth, Common. Basic Twin Fang Style, Uncommon. Basic Shadow Vault of Umbra, Uncommon. Splitting Arrow, Uncommon. Hunter's Tracking, Uncommon. Big Game Hunter, Rare. Infused Power Shot, Rare. Mark of the Ambitious Hunter, Rare. Archery of Vast Horizons, Rare. Descending Dark Fang, Rare. Limit Break, Rare. Arrow of the Ambitious Hunter, Epic. One Step Mile, Ancient. Moment of the Primal Hunter, Legendary. Gaze of the Apex Hunter, Legendary. Profession skills: Herbology, Common. Brew Potion, Common. Alchemist's Purification, Common. Alchemical Flame, Common. Toxicology, Uncommon. Cultivate Toxin, Uncommon. Concoct Poison, Uncommon. Malefic Viper's Poison, Rare. Sense of the Malefic Viper, Epic. Touch of the Malefic Viper, Epic. Scales of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Palate of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Blood of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Sagacity of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Wings of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Pride of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Fangs of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. Blessing. True Blessing of the Malefic Viper, Blessing. True. Race skills: Endless Tongues of the Myriad Races, Unique. Identify, Common. Thoughtful Meditation, Uncommon. Shroud of the Primordial, Divine. Bloodline. Bloodline of the Primal Hunter, Bloodline ability, Unique. Jake looked over his ever-growing status menu and smiled. It wasn't like at the beginning, where he'd felt it go through substantial changes every single day, but it was still developing at a noticeable pace. He was looking forward to D-grade more than ever, too, and he could almost smell it. He had less than 10 levels remaining. It was truly the final stretch. The Malefic Viper sat in his realm as power swirled around him. He stared through the void, not looking at anything in particular, but just the vast nothingness that existed between the universes. He raised his hand and stared at it before sighing as yet another attempt failed. "Still not quite there," he said, as he got up and shifted his gaze to raise his spirits a bit. "Sylphian. Huh." He chuckled before shaking his head. "I wonder how that came to be." Sylphs were rare, old, and extremely powerful wind elementals. They were some of the most intelligent among all elementals and wielded powerful magic. Wind affinity spells, yes, but also a plethora of other means. They were hell to deal with and could often defeat enlightened races at equal levels. A top-grade race for sure. But the part about being old was important. They were almost archaic. A sylph was not born, but only evolved into by powerful elementals that had lived nearly to the end of their lifespans before evolving. Was that his own contribution to the creation? A touch of time and ancientness? No, that wouldn't have been enough. Far from it. Was it Jake's mana that had caused the change? It was incredibly pure and approaching a new threshold, one the Viper hoped he would overcome before reaching D-grade, even if it would be ridiculous for him to do so. Jake's path was one the Viper respected. It was honest and without any deceit. He truly just wanted to fight and become stronger. His desire for power was not born of greed for anything but power itself, a truly pure and straightforward path. So was his approach to everything, including mana. His way of doing it was simple. His mana practice was almost insultingly effective, considering how inane and uncomplicated it was. He didn't mix in other mana affinities and had even ignored his, quite frankly, top-level darkness affinity. He had managed not to pollute or specialize any of his mana with any mana attunements because of that. One didn't need to have an attunement to shape one's magic, but simply using a type of magic too much was enough to color your mana and shape your records. Jake hadn't done that. His mana always remained pure, a purity he was only condensing and refining to an entirely new level, even if he did so unknowingly. It was a purity not just in mana, but in will and intent as well. So, was that truly what gave birth to the Sylphian Aias? Just the purity of his mana? The Sylphs were as pure as any elemental could get. They were primeval and concepts incarnate. The only explanation he saw for Jake having such a strong power of purity within his records was his bloodline. If not, the Viper's records would have undoubtedly affected him on a more fundamental level. Yet they hadn't. But that answer confused the Viper quite a bit, too. What did increased perception and natural fighting instincts have to do with purity and rawness? Honestly, it didn't matter. The Viper had no desire to find out all the small, intricate details of his pal's bloodline outside of pure curiosity. The only real reason he truly wanted to know was to discover its effects on the small avian. His friend clearly cared for the tiny thing. Velastramaz couldn't help but look towards a particular area in his realm as his mood dampened significantly. He knew he couldn't linger with his consciousness in the realm any longer. The avatar closed its eyes as it became dormant and returned to slumber, the Viper's real body still in the outside world. The beast in question was currently on a mighty quest to find the big human. For too long she had been denied her rightful resting place. Too long had her parents kept her away. The warnings of danger from being near the human's smelly smoke didn't faze her. She could handle the smelly smoke. Stealthily, she crept across the floorboards, making sure to stay low. She swiftly made her way under one of the chairs, staying perfectly hidden throughout it all. Small amounts of wind even surrounded her to limit sound, a true stroke of genius she had come upon to mask her every movement. Sylphie didn't doubt her prowess for even a second as she took a long leap, assisted by the wind and a flap of her small wings, and made her way under the table. Halfway there. Her goal was the back end of the big treehouse and through the opening leading to the water with the scary long fish. She could have tried to go around the building, but she knew her parents watched from above and would detect her instantly. No, through the house was the best way to stay hidden. Everything was as she had planned, each of her steps calculated to the smallest detail, her approach perfection itself. After another sneaky walk, she was close to the door. She could already see the tall human, apparently unaware of the apex creature about to pounce. Indeed, she had gone above and beyond herself. In one final leap, she jumped through the slightly open door with a mighty roar. Chirp, chirp, chirp! The human jumped with fright as Sylphie triumphantly jumped on top of his head where she stood proudly. She was rewarded for her perfection as the tall human scratched her in that good spot below her neck. Once more she had proven how great she truly was. It rewarded the human by mercifully reciprocating his affection. Great and benevolent. Jake scratched the proud bird as she nuzzled up to him happily. After a long day of crafting, he found nothing more relaxing than playing with the small hawk, to watch her stealthily sneak up on him through his lodge. Of course, Sylphie's version of stealth was to kick up a deafening whirlwind around herself, so instead of listening to footsteps, you could hear the sound of a small tornado walking through the house, making things fall off their shelves. Yet Jake couldn't bring himself not to let her win every single time. A primordial couldn't observe him unnoticed, and so far he had yet to encounter any skill that could hide from his sphere, but Sylphie had found the one way to counter him, make him lose on purpose. Well, not like Jake needed any of his perception-related abilities to notice the bird. He doubted she could sneak up on anything. But damn, was she cute when she did it. And luckily for the work Jake was now doing, she wasn't in any danger when spending time with him. It had been 4 days since he finished his first uncommon rarity fungicide, and now he had already moved on to his next task, Touch of the Malefic Viper. He hadn't forgotten about the fungus. Oh no, he was just waiting for a delivery. Besides, he couldn't leave the tiny bird alone after he had kept her away for so long. Over the last 4 days, he had gained another level in his profession, bringing it to 93, while also giving him another race level. That got him to a total of 100 free points at the ready to distribute whenever. He could throw it all into wisdom now and make his poison a bit stronger, but he preferred to save them. The day earlier, Miranda had come by with a delivery of weapons. They were weapons made by the craftsmen of the city, all created mainly to practice. Of course, they were still more than usable weapons in combat, But these were spares that no one needed, or at least that was what Miranda had told him. Most of them were just inferior rarity ones and were relatively simple. Sharpened steel short sword, inferior. A blade made of steel that has been soaked in mana and crafted by a still-growing smith. The craftsmanship is lacking in some areas, but the blade is solidly built. Enchantments, sharpened blade. Requirements, level 25 plus in any humanoid race. Deflective iron buckler, inferior. A buckler made of mana-infused iron and crafted by a still-growing smith. The craftsman has put his all into this item, making it a respectable buckler for a smith of the creator's level, and it is especially potent at deflecting ranged attacks. Enchantments, deflection. Requirements, level 30 plus in any humanoid race. Jake looked them over and saw the inferior tags, instantly discounting them both. Yet, from what Miranda had told him, they actually tended to hold up well against the common rarity tutorial items. Likely, those items back in the tutorial's outer zone had been created for those around level 25, seeing as they were primarily found in areas with weaker beasts. As those items didn't have any level requirements, that did kind of make sense. The uncommon rarity tutorial items were, of course, a grade better. Jake's quiver was still doing okay, if beginning to feel a bit lacking. And as for the cloak...
Yo, Brandon, what's up?
So they finally got back to me. There's plenty of pitching a fit players that want to play.
Which ones?
The good one. The one's name is Ray. He plays third base and he pitches.
Okay,
That's a bigger guy.
problem is I don't have room for 4.
What?
I don't know if we have room for 3.
Okay. What do you think we have room for?
I mean, alright, so it's 12 all. I want to win, and next year we're gonna win. However, you know, it doesn't change the fact that, listen, man, how am I supposed to build anything if I fucking lose anyone that's mildly decent?
That's it, man. Like, we had, so we went to the GDS fair last night, right?
Yeah.
And Skylar was like, holy shit, Brandon. She's like, now I see why you dress the way you do. This is like a high school reunion for you. I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the fairs kind of are for me, the West End fair is kind of that. If I would actually go.
Yeah, like, I haven't been to that area. Oh, I went past Ben's house. I haven't, if I would actually go back to that area, I haven't been back to that area in like 6 years.
Yeah, I didn't go to the West End fair at all this year. But if I did, I'd bump into fucking half a dozen people there that I fucking know. And
That's it.
fucking
And then Skylar thought she was famous last night because one of my buddies who was driving in the demolition derby, came over and talked to me, and he gave her a fist bump. And she's like, "Holy shit!" I was like, "He's legally blind. Don't worry about it." But
what? Last year and the year before, I fucking bumped into some chick that I fucking had a fucking friends with benefits relationship before. But the both times I bumped into her, she was with her boyfriend, who I was fucking when she first started dating him.
naturally.
Right. So I'm like, that's kind of awkward.
Well, we out, especially that area, like, there's gonna be, like, we even see my ex-wife, Hope, right? Like, it was nuts. And Skylar was shooting her dirty looks.
Oh, this one's actually from the Bangor area.
Oh, no. Still, hold on, I'm walking one of my guys' dogs because he's on vacation. I feel so bad. This dog's been home all week, like, just by himself.
Yeah, that's fucked up. How you just ditch your dog like that?
I wouldn't be able to, ever.
Fuck no.
Like, this dog, I feel for, you know what I mean?
Dude, I could never just leave for a week and fucking not make sure my dog was taken care of. I can't do that.
I promised him I'd take care of his dog, you know? But, like, my dog has been, like, my best friend. Like, I would never be able to leave him for a week.
Oh no, trust me, I like my dog better than most people. I agree with you.
Like, I wouldn't, like, and now that my dog's, like, dead, well, he is dead,
Yeah.
but, like, this is the first dog I've been able to, like, look at since he died.
Yeah, I mean it happens.
Oh, now I want another dog, like, majorly.
Yeah, I mean the only downside to that is it makes it hard to go on vacation.
Yeah, I always register my dogs as service animals.
You're one of them.
Yeah, so you can't refuse a service animal.
People have actually started refusing the social anxiety animals now.
They can't.
I don't know. I think social anxiety animals should be able to be.
Like, I registered a social anxiety eating kit.
No offense, it's retarded.
It is absolutely retarded, but it works.
Yeah, I don't. You know me. I'm kind of an asshole. I don't really.
Exactly.
I don't really support modern day mental health.
No, neither do I, but it was just fun because I got to bring a guinea pig.
Like every time I see someone with a chihuahua in a fucking restaurant, I'm like, you fucking bitch. You don't need that fucking dog.
Asshole. Like those little puppies inside Home Depot.
Listen, I don't give a shit about Home Depot, right? Like it's fucking Home Depot. What are you gonna hurt?
And then the ones in Walmart.
Yeah, but like when you're walking around like fresh food and shit like that with your dog, I don't want somebody else's dog's hair in my food.
Agreed.
Like I get it, I might eat my own dog's hair, But I don't want to eat your dog's hair.
Right. Like, this dog is so shy, too, man. Like, as soon as I unhook his lead, he runs behind the TV.
Poor dog.
Like, he's so shy. And, like, I spent the last 4 days, like, him getting used to me. So now he, like, doesn't shake anymore.
Poor dog probably feels abandoned.
Yeah. Well, he's only, like, 10 months old.
Well, yeah, and that's what people don't realize though. Like when you leave like that, your dog feels like his family left him.
Yeah.
Like, of course they're freaking like. The only thing I don't get upset about my dog about too much is the fact that she does not do well when I'm not home.
Right.
She just doesn't. She I cannot really go for long trips because she has destroyed people's houses.
Yeah. Alright, Phil. I'll see you in the morning, big dog.
She chewed a hole in my brother's wooden floor.
Really?
Yeah,
Which brother?
Kyle.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, she just doesn't do well when I'm not home. When it's for a couple hours, it's one thing, but like when it's a long time, she's not. You know,
Yeah.
she misses me. She wants me around.
I get that. I do.
Yeah, she's a
But
good girl though.
I don't know, man. Like it's like and we found this dog. I was actually just gonna come home with it. I wasn't even gonna say anything, but then I realized that may put me in some very much hot water.
And you want to play softball, so you can't, cash in all your chips at once.
Right, right. So now I'm like, I'm at the crossroads, man. Like, we're either gonna fix this, or I'm just gonna go out and get the milk and never come back.
Dude, I hate to say it, I get you.
And then like, you can only flip out so many times. You know what I mean?
Like I'm an asshole. Like I've walked away in the past before when shit just wasn't right. Like that
Yeah.
that chick I was dating last year, whatever, Tracy. Like I just fucking told her, I was like, dude, this ain't working. And she wanted to argue, like, no, it is working. It's like, no, it's really not. It's like the fact that
Yeah,
you
like if we have to argue every fucking night, like it ain't worth it.
the fact that you don't even realize it's not working just shows that you're delusional about what you
Right.
think
And
we
then
are.
like, the only thing that makes it complicated is I love Lauren's kids. You know what I mean?
I mean, listen, kids make everything difficult, but at the same
Like
time,
Lauren,
like
I would have absolutely no problem walking the fuck away from. You know what I mean? But those kids, like, they've been through a lot.
so I think the hardest question, the most difficult part is, like, is it really the best for the kids to see their parents or their mom and their stepdad or whatever not getting along?
Like, we don't let them see it. Like, we just don't fucking speak to each other when we piss each other off, and they see it. Like, the kids were talking to me. They're like, "Yo, just so you know, if you and mom ever break up, like, you don't get to get rid of us. Like, we're gonna text you, and we're gonna come over to your house."
Well, that's as long as she's okay with that, that's fine.
Yeah, and realistically, they're old enough where she wouldn't get a choice.
Her one daughter is pretty old.
Yeah, she's 16, and that's the one that's like, I don't know, I got a bunch of money invested into now because my company invested in her band, like in the marching band, which that wasn't really for her. That was my own selfish fucking motives.
Well, yeah, but I
But
mean, like,
she doesn't have to know that.
yeah, but at the same time, like, you know, that to me is just money spent. Like, whatever.
Well, see, I'm gonna get that back because what the $3,000 entailed is our name gets publicized in all the band books, which they're nationally recognized, and they compete all over Pennsylvania. And
Right.
then
So,
like every home game, I get a banner. They walk out with my banner.
oh, that's nice.
So like realistically, my own selfish motive was, yeah, I just spent $3,000, but I'm gonna get 9,000 back in returns.
Yeah. No, fucking Jess wants me to pitch. I might have to pitch on Tuesday. And
Oh,
listen,
in the men's league?
yeah.
Uh,
Listen, we both know I can pitch, but like,
yo, message Jess for me because if I do, it'll be World War III.
means you'd have to gear up.
Wait, now do they do different brackets, or does everybody play everybody in that?
It's just like it's another Palmer Bench league, so everybody plays everybody, then playoffs splits off.
Oh, okay. I wish the Pocono Mountain League would run like Palmer.
So we're kind of pushing for that for next year. Which, ironically, we still wouldn't have made it because we were the 17th team out of 17, but, you know.
Right, but naturally, like, it still should be everybody plays everybody.
I messaged Jeff. I said, any chance you want Brandon for Tuesdays? He pitches too.
Yeah. Yeah, because that'll be nice, and then I could swing a bat and whatever.
Yeah. Listen, I don't really like her fucking team, but whatever. I'll show up and play the game.
Yeah. Always will, man. She's a whore anyway. You should go after her.
I don't want her.
Adam wants her.
Talking about
Adam Pulse.
Okay, so I'm not sure how many people Adam wouldn't fuck.
The answer is nobody now. He would absolutely fuck everybody in the world.
That's kind of my point. Like,
you should have heard the stories when he was working for me, man.
yeah,
He was picking up like black chicks out of Philadelphia and shit.
I mean, listen, I got no problem with black chicks or nothing, but like Adam.
No, nothing wrong with black chicks, but they were gross.
Yeah, I think Adam would pretty much tap anything that'll have him.
They were heifers.
I mean, his wife's not exactly tiny.
No, but so last New Year's, right? We went out on New Year's Eve. It was me, Adam, Monique, and Lauren, right? Monique and Lauren got so shit-faced that by the end of the night, they were showing their tits to everyone in the bar.
I'd be kind of pissed.
I was. And then, like, it was just nuts. And then last night, I took Skylar to the GDS fair, and she went out with her girlfriend to see a Newfound Glory concert, then decided to go out to the bar afterwards. I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'll babysit all the kids. Got it.
See, on one hand, I'm like, oh, well, that shouldn't make a difference. On the other hand, yeah, but it's like, but yeah, she's already shown that when she gets drunk, she can't be trusted. Like, that's...
Yeah. But, like, me, with her, I don't really give a shit. Like, if that were the case, I'm kind of looking for an out. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Like, go ahead, get plowed by another dude. See how fast your cash cow goes away.
Oh, you're a whore.
Whatever, bro. Like, I'm convinced. Right before I met Lauren, I had a real shot with Amy.
Don't know. She's with Jim now.
Is she with Jim?
Yeah.
That's good.
They're like officially together now.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm happy for Amy and Jim. They both deserve somebody decent.
Oh yeah, Amy's good people.
She is good people. Like, her, and this sucks to say because I'm not allowed to say her name, but nobody, like, her, Laura, and, like, all the people we always used to hang out with, they're all good people. You know what I mean?
Oh no, that entire softball team I pretty much got along with. Which,
like,
you know.
Joe Whitmer, I like Joe Whitmer.
Uh-huh.
Will Banning, I don't really like too
so
much.
Will can be kind of a... you gotta get used to Will.
Yeah.
Like, he grows on people. He's a little bit pushy, a little bit testy. He's not a bad dude. He's just a little, you know... takes some getting used to, that's all.
I wasn't expecting bench warmers to beat them today.
Nobody was.
That kind of sucks.
I mean, to be fair, I predicted a Wrong Tones bench warmers final. and I still thought bench warmers would probably get it.
There
Now
was
that
a big stink about everyone like reacting like why Joe wasn't a number three pitcher. Like who rates pitchers? Like is that a thing?
it shouldn't be because, as I've said 100 times, if you can throw high and low and strikes,
You're a decent pit. Yeah, you're
so
a decent pitcher.
pitchers have two things: either they do their job or they fucking suck. There's no such thing as a good pitcher.
I
Either
don't know. I just didn't get it. Like there was a whole big like debate on pitching. Like yeah, there's some pitchers that have absolutely nasty like a nasty curveball, but bottom line is the ball is coming at 2 miles an
I'll
hour.
say that curveball. So my argument has always been this: hitters hit. It doesn't matter what the pitcher throws. It's
Right.
ASA softball. A hitter will hit. In U-Trip, pitchers make a little bit more of a difference, but even then, hitters hit.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I found a fast pitch league by the way if you would like to
I've
play.
I know what modified is.
Well, no, I was asking if you want to play.
Do I want to play in a league where people are trying to throw underhand 60 miles an hour and either grown as adults that probably have no control? Probably not.
They absolutely most of these pitchers like have absolute control. Like me, I would be great at pitching modified because I always pitch batting practice to girls softball teams.
No, listen, I have no faith in people fucking not pegging me with the ball. That said, I would probably do it.
Yeah,
I'm not saying I wouldn't play. I'm saying that I'm not looking for a modified league, but if you put a team in a modified league and said, hey, Roy, I need a player, I'm probably going to show up and play.
but see, like that league, like pitchers actually wear gear and shit.
No, dude, I have no interest in a league where they encourage collisions with the catcher.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
like
That
and
doesn't
like
interest
but
me.
that's how my dad was like. He started out umpiring like that. I'm trying to get my dad to come umpire for us next year
I
because
mean,
he's an ASA umpire, but he does a lot of like college softball and girls softball.
back to this.
Well, it existed and could change colors a bit and make his head not get wet when it rained. Anyway, level requirements clearly mattered for items a lot, maybe even as much, if not more, than the rarity. One of the last weapons was a perfect example of this. Ferocious Machete, common. A machete created from iron that has been soaked in the blood of a powerful beast. Due to the crafting process, faint remnant records of the beast remain within the weapon. The craftsman behind this weapon has shown great promise. Any wound inflicted with this weapon will inflict amplified pain, increasing with each successive attack. Enchantments, ferocious slashes. Requirements, level 10 plus in any humanoid class. Jake had tried the blade a bit and found it significantly worse than the steel sword. Apparently, it was an early creation from a smith that had only recently begun working hard on his profession, so Jake was looking forward to getting interesting things from that guy later. Apparently, he had created many weapons by soaking metals in the blood of the dead herd leaders. Clearly, he had some skill to facilitate it, and Jake found it quite interesting. He also noted how all the system's descriptions of the items were relatively friendly. None of them called the smiths bad or something like that, but instead used very positive language. Maybe the system wasn't that bad after all. Sure, it kind of allowed fucked up, degenerate bastards to choose a path of absolute debauchery, but at least it was polite while doing so. Jake chuckled a bit at his thoughts, earning an annoyed slap from the small wing of Sylphie, telling him to stop moving his head. Shaking his head, making the bird slap him again, he happily scratched the small hawk and dove right into absolutely destroying weapons that the many hopeful smiths of Haven had worked hard to make. Chapter 51. A Plan Brought to Fruition. Jake sat in meditation with his sword placed on the palms of his hands. He slowly began using Touch of the Malefic Viper as he pushed the corrupting mana into the blade. He felt it resist at first, but Jake was too strong for the metal, and soon he forced his energy into it. Like a trillion microscopic tendrils, the mana invaded every part of the blade, coloring it from its old, steely color to a dark, almost entirely black palette. The mana it gave off grew with every second as the blade went through a complete transformation. Jake opened his eyes and quickly identified the sword. Unstable necrotic steel short sword, common. A blade made of steel that has been soaked in mana and crafted by a still-growing smith, infused with powerful necrotic mana. The necrotic mana has increased the blade's rarity and power, but made it incredibly unstable and fragile. Will break apart within 12 minutes and 13 seconds. Enchantments, necrotic strike. Requirements, level 45 plus in any humanoid race. Still not good enough, he admonished himself as he shook his head. Sure, the blade looked better, but it was just a broken object already. He could see the minuscule cracks across its edge, and he was sure that it would break apart if he tried hitting anything with it. Jake had come to another realization about the Touch of the Malefic Viper skill and its relation to more regular alchemy. The Viper clearly focused on poison above all other things, but his skills also helped with other parts of alchemy. Palate could now also allow him to eat herbs to learn their effects, while the rare version only allowed him to learn from toxins. It also increased the effects of potions, making brewing those clearly a part of the Malefic Viper's repertoire of skills. Sagacity of the Malefic Viper was another piece of proof that the profession was about more than just making poison. It helped create a plethora of other alchemical creations, including flasks and elixirs, making Jake believe that the legacy of the Malefic Viper encompassed pretty much anything that had to do with alchemy, even if it was highly specialized in making toxins.
Sure, why not?
And when Jake thought back to what an alchemist was supposed to do, he missed one very apparent ability: transmutation. To alter an item, transforming it from one state to another. It could be argued that any alchemical creation had some aspects of transmutation. Still, nothing was more evident than the changes he had brought about in items through Touch of the Malefic Viper. So he reached the conclusion that a core part of the authentic Touch of the Malefic Viper revolved around transmutation through corruption. Even if the skill description didn't currently say it, it very clearly had at least partly such a function already. And now he was trying to improve that part of the skill. So far, there was the minor issue of his Touch of the Malefic Viper kind of breaking stuff. Jake was looking for a way to both infuse the mana and at the same time make it stable. This had resulted in a pile of broken metal off to the side of the valley, lying on a large wooden platform. Before it was on the platform, all the metal had just been placed on the ground, but Jake had noticed that the grass surrounding it withered as the metal's corrupt mana began soaking into the ground. At that point, Jake had gotten the brilliant idea of maybe trying to do something with all the discarded metal. Sadly, that proved to be a worthless idea, as the metal had truly become too brittle and broken after his failed experiments. He kept working for the rest of the day and into the morning, only taking breaks to play with Sylphie while regenerating mana, or diving into his thoughtful meditation to mentally go through what he had just learned from his last practice session. On that morning, it wasn't Miranda, but Lillian that came by. She was dragging a small cart with metal tubes in it, and Jake quickly ran over and helped the moment he saw her. On his way over, he made his mask invisible, internally praising himself for remembering it. "Thank you," she said, as Jake lifted up the cart with his mana control, allowing her to just walk to the lodge with him. It wasn't that she couldn't move it herself. Jake was pretty sure any human at level 10 could do so easily, but it was still a bit awkward to move through the grass. A few days before he finished his first fungicide, he had sent another commission to the city with more items he needed. Today, they had finally arrived, and Jake expectantly identified the first of them. Simple timed injector, inferior. A simple tool to inject a liquid from a bottle fitting the form after a set timer. The injection method is through a long metal barrel shaped like a large needle. Solidly, if hastily constructed, from steel and simple mana scripts. Requirements, variable. Just what I needed, Jake thought, as he smiled. Lillian noticed his smile and added, "Arnold worked quite fast in making them, and even if he wasn't satisfied with their rarity, he was quite pleased with their functionality. The slot in the side is explicitly made to the poison bottle you provided, and on all his tests, they appeared to work as intended. Here, he made this manual for some reason." She handed him a small pamphlet with some easy-to-understand diagrams that explained how the very self-explanatory device worked. Jake couldn't help but chuckle a bit at it. It reminded him of Before the System and of the absolutely inane guides found on the intranet of the company he worked at. The simplest things were explained to the lowest common denominator. Jake had heard it had something to do with regulations or avoiding lawsuits or something. Still, he was personally sure it was just because there were many people out there who were absolutely technologically illiterate. Jake was pretty damn sure Arnold had worked with making inventions or something like that before the system, and he must have made the small guide by habit. Or maybe Philip's men also kind of sucked at using technology. Well, he had learned that a lot of people sucked at manipulating mana, so perhaps it made sense to give people guides. After unloading all the injectors, he held one up and inspected it deeper. They were nearly 2 meters tall and had a piston-like device installed to drive a needle-like barrel into the ground before injecting the payload. It was solid workmanship, and Jake was more than happy with it after doing a few of his own tests, mainly with how durable it was. Sadly, he didn't have any spares for testing, so he chose to believe in them working. Now, what would he need 11 large timed injectors for? Well, quite simple, actually. To kill a fucking mushroom. 11 doses of uncommon rarity fungicide were all he had enough materials left over to craft. He didn't know if it would be enough, but he hoped so. His plan was to place these all over the biodome and set the timer so they all went down and injected simultaneously. With a powerful fungicide in the ground, the mushroom would naturally begin absorbing it little by little without noticing. Maybe it would even believe the energy to be beneficial due to the effects of the soothing bellberry. But he had another trick up his sleeves to attract it. Jake had studied fungi monsters a lot, and they tended to have a few things in common. They tended to require a lot of nutrients due to their large size and because their progression often relied on expanding their sizes. To do this, they typically, or far more frequently, preyed on living things, absorbing powerful natural sources of mana. And of the many mana affinities, they were known to mainly prefer water and earth affinity mana. Well, besides pure mana, but pretty much everything wanted that. For pure mana, he didn't have any good bait, but for earth mana, he had barrels of it. Soil water, common. Water infused with strong earth affinity mana, making it purer and holding certain magical properties. can be used as an ingredient in many alchemical recipes or simply consumed in its raw form to restore mana for those possessing the earth affinity. Jake would gladly dump half a barrel around each injector to make the mushroom drink it all up, along with the fungicide. And then he would wait. Either the fungus would die without even discovering how, or it would notice its poisoning and go berserk, at which point Jake would jump into action and begin bombarding it with arrows and magic. It was simple, but if Jake wanted to take down the damn blue mushroom fuck while still in E grade, he didn't think there would be a better time. Sure, he would get stronger if he upgraded his touch or sense first, but he had also been sitting still for too long. While he had practiced a bit with Hawkeye, it wasn't enough. Jake began his final preparations. Each of the injectors had a small compartment for one of Jake's poison bottles, and he found that they fit in perfectly. When the timer went off, the bottle would be crushed and the liquid pushed down into the ground. A simple but nevertheless effective device. When he was done preparing all 11 injectors, he put them into his spatial storage before turning to Lillian. "I'm heading down. Say hi to Miranda for me, and see you next time." "Be careful," Lillian said, clearly already aware that Jake was going to fight the creature that dwelled below. Jake hadn't told her much about it, so she probably wasn't sure how strong it was, just that he had returned battered and with tattered armor every time he went down there. Jake just smiled as he raised his hand in a wave, making his mask visible again, and his eyes sharpened. He had fought the mushroom twice and had to escape for his life both times, but, as one says, third time's the charm. The caterpillar crawled across the large leaf, munching on the small pieces of moss growing on it. Its sharp teeth were ripping it out after loosening it with an acid that didn't cause any damage to the leaf below.
Not bad for now.
It just sat there, munching, when suddenly the leaf ruffled and it was thrown off. It landed on the ground unhurt and made a threatening sound towards the direction of the two larger insects fighting. But its instincts made it aware it wasn't a fight it should get involved in, so it cowardly crawled in the other direction, looking for more mana-rich food. Dragging itself away, it searched the ground until encountering the most peculiar plant. It was roughly 1 meter tall and looked very odd, as it was perfectly cylinder-shaped. A bit confused, the insect tried biting the plant but found the bark too tough. Annoyed, it scurried away until the plant abruptly made a move itself. Without any warning, it suddenly slammed its upper portion into the ground before coming inert again. Even more confused than before, the caterpillar hurried away, as it got a feeling something terrible was about to happen. Jake sneakily made his way out of the biodome, doing everything he could to not engage in any fights or scare any insects too much. He wanted to avoid waking up the mushroom as much as possible. While he had gotten a bit stronger since last time, it was far from enough to actually fight the monstrous fungus. He still got chills when he imagined the speed of those vines and the final blast of mana. He carefully placed down each injector and embedded them in the ground with a good push. At the same time, he made small holes at the bottom of a barrel he placed right beside each injector. It wasn't as fine-tuned as the injectors, but Jake believed not enough energy would have time to seep into the ground and be detected before the fungicide injector also went off. Was the plan perfect? Of course not. If it were, it would be too dull, wouldn't it? Jake's sneaky adventure into the biodome only took a few minutes, with each injector set to go off 5 minutes after being placed. Activating the 5-minute timer took nothing more than injecting a bit of mana. When the last injector was placed and the final barrel dumped right next to it, he quickly ran out of the biodome while still trying to stay undetected. If the mushroom woke up, it sure as hell wouldn't be happy, and being in the middle of it rampaging sounded like a horrible idea. Once outside in safety, he knelt down to make himself appear smaller and made sure the cloak covered his entire body with its camouflage active. While he was outside, he knew it still had ranged attacks that could potentially reach him, so he wanted to be as invisible as he could. Closing his eyes, he focused on the feedback from scents of the malefic viper. He felt his concocted fungicide vividly in his mind. Time ticked by. Around 40 seconds later, the first injector activated. Jake felt the poison be released from its bottle and forcefully pushed into the ground. 15 seconds later, the second triggered. 18 seconds later came the third, and so it continued until all 11 had delivered their payload. Not a single one of them failed to do their job. Jake smiled and thanked Arnold internally, deciding to give the man a bonus after he returned. Minutes passed with nothing happening. The soil water and fungicide were mixing, slowly seeping deeper and deeper into the ground. Perhaps it was due to the soil water, but it sank way faster than water normally could, and soon it hit something, a part of the fungus. It didn't make any large sounds or movements, but Jake subtly felt it absorb a bit of the nutritious mana, inadvertently ingesting the fungicide along with it. Jake crossed his fingers that the fungus wouldn't notice anything was amiss. A dozen or so seconds passed as he felt the fungicide go deeper through the roots of the fungus before it reached the actual body. It was swiftly absorbed along with the mana from the soil water, with the fungus not having any immediate adverse reactions. Instead, it sent more roots to absorb the energy. Not long after, it noticed another potent source of energy and began drinking from there too. Within half an hour, it had absorbed all the soil water and fungicide. Jake felt it slowly burn away at the fungus's vitality below the ground as it spread throughout the entire creature. He felt like he had poisoned the whole biodome. With bated breath, he waited as the poison got more and more ingrained in the fungus, not just in its body, but even in its soul. After over 2 hours, Jake was beginning to believe that the fungus would never notice. He felt it weaken with the fungicide still as powerful as ever. But just when he thought he would be able to win without a fight, he saw one of the giant blue mushrooms above ground suddenly wilt, and then... all hell broke loose. Chapter 52. Press F for fungus. Absolute mayhem. That is the only phrase Jake could use to accurately describe the chaos happening inside the biodome. Vines flew everywhere, random bolts of mana fired at anything moving, and all the poor insects that were just crawling around the biodome, minding their own business, were ripped to pieces. The fungus didn't even look like it tried to absorb them. It just killed them and evaporated their bodies. Jake just sat there, patiently monitoring the poison. Indigo fungus mycorrhiza, level unknown. While he was there, he also tried to focus on improving his sense of the malefic viper to better sense how his poison interacted with the body of the fungi. He felt how it spread and invaded every part of it, how it polluted its resource pools and devoured its health points. He felt like he was improving his ability to sense the energy, once more also finding parallels between it and his mana control. Learning how the fungicide worked to kill the fungus would help him out in the future when he needed to create better mana techniques, so he took it all in. As long as he could, that is. Finally, the mushroom noticed him. It fired a few small blasts of mana his way in what Jake could barely even recognize as an attack. Clearly, it didn't focus on him or even recognize him from their last encounter. Indeed, he'd been right when he surmised the fungus was stupid. Unsurprising, considering it was a goddamn overgrown blue mushroom. Jake got up and went into action after dodging the mana blasts thrown his way. He knew he would now catch its attention, but he was prepared. He summoned orbs of mana above him that he charged up to hold quite a quantity. He then sent them floating into the biodome, where he instantly saw a few vines fly over and try to destroy them. Jake smiled as his theory was once more confirmed. It indeed did rely on some kind of mana vision. It went well with how it also sucked at detecting that it was infected by something. All in all, its perception just sucked outright. It didn't need to see things when it could just kill them by way of its sheer size and overwhelming power. It was a monster designed to be the king within its own hunting grounds. A king that Jake was about to dethrone by poisoning the land the king reigned over. 2 wings appeared behind him as they began pumping out a mist of poison. Jake didn't blow it into the dome, but kept it around himself in a cloud of thick smoke. He obscured the entrance to the biodome, far from enough for Jake not to be able to see through it, but enough for the fungus to only see a giant blob of mana in its vision. At the same time, he summoned mana bolts, weak versions of his regular bolts that looked more like transparent floating crystals than anything meant to attack with. He waved his hand, and bottle after bottle appeared, each containing mushroom-killing juices. It was all the common rarity fungicide he had concocted over the last weeks. Far from as effective as the uncommon rarity soul-invading poison, but effective nevertheless. He swayed a bit to avoid a blast of mana fired his way as strings of mana sprang out of his hands and began tying the bottles to his bolts. He fused the bottles inside each bolt and fired them into the dome, aiming for the larger mushrooms or plants within. When the bolts hit, they burst in a rather unimpressive explosion. It didn't even harm the plants, but it was more than enough to make the bottles shatter and send the fungicide flying everywhere. This continued as Jake dodged all attacks coming his way, noticing that the fungus's aim was totally off. It tried to make up for it with quantity, but the poison mist made the area it had to bombard too large, especially considering it had to shoot all its bolts through the relatively small entrance to the biodome. He kept up his barrage of fungicide and weak bolts. The reason he used bolts to deliver his attacks was quite simple. The fungus reacted to them. Several of the bolts were intercepted by vines that either stabbed into the bolt or just slapped it, making the bolt explode and spraying the fungicide all over it. Minutes passed, with the damage building up. Finally, it was forced to show its actual body. Blue vines flew up as the entire biodome shook. The moment Jake saw the first blue vine, he marked it and jumped back around the corner of the cave, away from the fungi. He had learned that he could only mark its true body, but that wasn't the only thing. His last fight with the fungus, coupled with his extensive research on how to slay it, had led him to have a sufficient understanding of the monster. Sufficient enough that when he held out his hand and focused on the monster in his mind, the skill responded. Arrow of the Ambitious Hunter. With his eyes closed, he focused his mind. Every fiber of the creature was clear to him as his sense of the malefic viper fed him constant information of the toxins in its body. And as the toxins had invaded every part of its body, Jake could feel its entire being. He probed deeper, sinking his consciousness into understanding the fungus. Not only its entire body, but its soul. Jake didn't even notice that the fungus was ripping itself out of the ground as a massive figure rose within the biodome. The massive monster that had made the biodome its home ever since the integration was now attempting to flee. Jake just kept his focus honed on making an arrow to finish off the fungus. The arrow that emerged from his hand looked like nothing he had ever made prior. It seemed almost ethereal, flickering in and out of existence. It was in an odd state of both existing and being immaterial. Jake opened his eyes and looked at it. Looks-wise, its shape was not much different from a normal arrow, but Jake felt a headache coming on by just looking at it. When he saw what resources it had consumed, he was also confused. It had drained equally from his health, mana, and stamina pools during its creation. But the confusion lasted only for a moment, as he understood. This arrow would not strike at the body of the fungus, but its soul. He reached out to grab the arrow and was met with a peculiar reaction. His hand phased partway through the arrow, but he soon noticed it was just his gloves. It ignored anything that was not his physical body, caring not for his clothes at all. Jake feared he wouldn't be able to knock it, but was happy to see that wasn't an issue, likely because the bow was infused with ample amounts of his mana. He took a single one-step mile back to the biodome entrance and could once more see inside. And if the situation earlier was absolute mayhem, it was now a cataclysm. What he saw shocked him for a moment because it looked absolutely surreal. It looked like a giant indigo spiderweb of roots was slowly crawling across the ground, with a dozen or so thick, root-like tendrils doing most of the work. Jake instantly knew it was the creature's actual body and that it was trying to relocate. Jake had contaminated the shit out of its home. It had absorbed energy from the earth and been heavily poisoned by the fungicide. Afterward, fungicide had been spread all over its area, and Jake had even pushed in some poison mist to make the air toxic. In summary, it was a really shitty place to live for any fungus. It was going to try and flee the biodome to escape the environment that would end up killing it, and even if it somehow survived, the biodome would no longer be a good hunting ground. Sadly for the indigo fungus mycorrhiza, it would never find a new home. An arrow that flickered in and out of existence flew through the air with unprecedented speed. It contained incredible amounts of mana, not just due to the arrow itself, but because it was shot with a fully charged infused power shot. 4 of the robust vines began moving up to try and block, and Jake allowed it to because he knew that no physical movement could possibly stop an arrow heading directly for one's soul. The arrow hit the creature in its vine and simply sank into its body, disappearing from sight. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen as the entire indigo fungus just froze up. Then, suddenly, it made a spasm-like movement as one of its vines flew out and slammed into one of the biodome walls, followed by another chaotic move. It began thrashing as Jake kept his distance. He knew something had broken inside it. It was already weak to begin with, its soul eroded and tortured for so long by the uncommon rarity poison. Jake didn't let up, however, as he attacked. Not with another arrow of the ambitious hunter, but just normal ones. He fired infused power shot after infused power shot, ripping the true form of the indigo fungus apart little by little. 2 times prior, he had come down to this biodome. 2 times he had been forced to flee. The last time, it had even gotten dangerously close. Yet, at his 3rd return, it was just a slaughter. In some ways, one could say that Jake had been fighting the fungus for over a month. The battle had been won not in a direct confrontation with his enemy, but through careful preparation and planning to take down his foe. Had his plan been perfect? No, far from it. But it had been adequate. You have slain indigo fungus mycorrhiza, level 105. Bonus experience earned for killing an enemy above your level. The humongous indigo fungus collapsed to the ground, looking like a giant pile of overcooked spaghetti. A fitting mental image of the accursed fungus. "Fuck yeah!" Jake cheered goofily as he got the notification, only to frown as he looked at the aforementioned system message. Wait, what? Jake asked himself, a bit confused as he double-checked the notification. How could it only be 105? What? He was a bit stumped about how that was possible. It was barely D-grade, and it had grown even stronger between his visits. Did that mean it had just reached D-grade the day he went to the biodome the first time? If not, how damn slow did it level? Also, holy shit, it was strong for its level. Jake had killed many creatures of higher level already, but none had proven to be big challenges. The Minotaur Mine Chief had been quite a lot higher than anything else, and yet he couldn't see the mushroom Actually, Jake was pretty damn sure the Minotaur Mine Chief could have killed the indigo fungus with some mental magic bullshit. Pun intended, as the overgrown mushroom had a weak soul. Was it just the matchup? Or was it particularly strong for its level? In pure stats alone, it had to trump anything Jake had ever faced before. Just the absolutely ridiculous amount of energy it had was more than all the other D-grades he had ever met put together. Well, besides the King of the Forest, but that freak didn't count. His next notifications weren't unexpected, but still something relatively new. Ding! Race Human E has reached level 97. Stat points allocated, plus 5 free points. Ding! Race Human E has reached level 98. Stat points allocated, plus 5 free points. He had gained 2 race levels because he was capped in his class. Quite frankly, it didn't mean much, as all it meant was that his next few levels in his professions wouldn't also net him race levels. Well, it would matter if he decided to level his race to 100 and evolve, but that wasn't the plan. No, right now the plan was to get some of that sweet loot, because if there was one thing mushrooms were suitable for, it was alchemy. Jake walked up to the massive creature and took out his blade. He quickly began dissecting it, already knowing what he wanted. He started with 14 large life vines of the creature. While he was dissecting it, he discovered that the monster was supposed to have 15, as it hadn't yet been able to regenerate the one it blew off itself last time Jake was there. Indigo fungus mycorrhiza life vine, rare. The life vine of an indigo fungus mycorrhiza. The life vine is a part of the main body of the fungus, contains intense amounts of vital energy, and is incredibly resilient. Can be used in a myriad of alchemical creations. All of them went into his spatial storage to be used later. Next, he went deeper into the body of the creature, searching for something within that was giving off a strong response from his sense of the malefic viper. It wasn't a toxin, but something that felt incredibly pure and powerful. Cutting away the disgusting fungus parts, he carved a small cave into the massive, putrid corpse. The corpse was a nearly 10 meters across mass of condensed fungus. It was all the small veins it had spread across the whole biodome, balled up into one big, ball. Luckily, the corpse was easily cut through after it had died, allowing him to quickly make it to his desired item. He could already see it within his sphere and used Identify on it before he even reached it. Indigo Fungus Mycorrhiza Life Core, EPIC. The life core of an indigo fungus mycorrhiza contains a massive amount of life affinity mana and vital energy, can be used in a myriad of alchemical creations, will grant a permanent increase to the vitality stat if consumed. Damn, epic rarity, Jake thought. That was pretty damn good. Reading the item itself, it got even better. A permanent increase in vitality. Nice. He picked up his speed and cut his way to the life core where he visually inspected it. It looked like a small, rugged stone, or maybe a large seed? Either way, it wasn't any larger than the palm of his hand, which was tiny compared to the massive monster it had been in. He would save the core for crafting after reaching D grade to make full use of it. Just eating it would be a waste. As Jake was preparing to make his way out of the disgusting corpse, he noticed something else. Despite the fungus leaving the biodome, it had still kept one connection established with its many roots. They wormed deep into the ground through a hole it had completely filled with parts of its main body. Jake frowned as he wondered what was down there, valuable enough for the fungus to resist abandoning despite its horrible situation. Was there something good down there? A natural treasure, perhaps? He could inspect it, but first he would have to get rid of the massive body blocking the hole. Summoning his alchemical flame, he got to work. He had taken anything that gave off a response from his sense of the malefic viper already, and the rest of the body was just a big gooey pile at this point, one he gladly set on fire. The entire creature was swiftly reduced to ashes and left behind far less than he would expect. The ashes themselves weren't anything valuable, but he hoped whatever was within the large hole now square in the middle of the biodome would be. Actually, calling it a biodome was a bit fallacious, because Jake was now the only living thing within. As all the plants had been part of the indigo fungus's body, they had all withered when it retracted itself from them to try and flee. Jake walked up to the hole and looked down. 40 or so meters down, he saw a green glow. As he didn't feel anything from his danger sense, he decided to slowly begin floating down after coating his feet in mana. His confusion only amplified as he approached the bottom, as his sphere began picking up what was down there. It was a room or cavern of sorts. The spot he was floating down towards was the exact center of the small cavern, from the looks of things. The center was occupied by what Jake could only describe as a large, completely blank, green glowing metal disc of sorts. The disc emanated a constant flow of potent life affinity mana, which was doubtlessly why the fungus wanted it, and possibly what had allowed it to evolve. Jake wondered what the disc was as he landed on top of it. A system message instantly answered his question. You have discovered the dungeon, Undergrowth of the Deep Dwellers. Requirements to enter, D grade. Requirements to enter not met. Warning, only 5 challengers are allowed per party attempting the dungeon. Chapter 53. Sensing the Arcane. Jake sat back in his lodge, happy as a clam with how the last day had gone. He had killed the accursed D-grade mega mushroom, gotten a bunch of valuable alchemy ingredients, and, to top it all off, even discovered a hidden dungeon. Eliminating the fungus was not only a good idea for his own mental health, but based on a bit of surveying he did afterward, it was also a good thing for the city. The damn thing had kept growing by the day, and it had only been a matter of time before it made its way to the surface with some of its feelers. At that point, it would have begun assimilating plants and trees above ground and growing even faster, becoming a massive threat to the entire settlement. Jake could only imagine giant life vines one day bursting through the ground, tearing apart buildings and draining the citizens with its needle-like vines. That would be a very bad time. But now that threat was dealt with, so that was nice. The dungeon was just the cherry on top. Sure, he couldn't enter it, but he already felt the butterflies in his stomach as he anticipated diving in there when he reached D grade. This is why he dove into leveling his profession the rest of the way with great vigor. During the fight with the fungus, he'd felt like he was close to passing some kind of threshold with sense of the malefic viper. Based on its description, the skill only allowed him to sense what his poison had infected and nothing more. He had been clever and used Mark of the Ambitious Hunter as a way of measuring how much damage he did, but his senses didn't tell him anything on their own. Against the fungus, that had changed. Jake had focused so deeply on sensing the effects of the toxin that he began also getting a grasp on its effects. Perhaps it was because it had touched the soul of his enemy, or maybe he had just gotten better at sensing things. However, it wasn't enough to get a skill upgrade. No, Jake needed to practice and experiment more. The issue was, he needed something to test on. He had thought a long time about what to test his poisons on, as he didn't have any giant funguses conveniently waiting around anymore. The first enemies he considered were the cloud elementals due to how unintelligent they were. Jake felt bad about effectively torturing something to improve himself, but at the same time, he really wanted to upgrade his sense of the malefic viper. Cloud elementals thus seemed like the most merciful foe he could try it on. There was just one minor issue with that. He didn't have any poisons that worked on the elementals. Well, his blood did work a tiny bit, but far from enough. Something of flesh and blood would, without a doubt, be best. Jake wasn't stupid and knew that many alchemists tested their toxins on live subjects, often dissecting the corpses afterward and or using tools to measure how the poison was ravaging the test subject. But doing that just didn't sit well with him. Could he go out and kidnap a few beasts to inflict with poison? Or even worse, have Miranda bring him a few citizens she didn't like? From a practical standpoint, he could. It just wouldn't feel right to him. He liked to fight enemies, not needlessly torture them. The more intelligent his prey, the more shitty he would feel. So, he settled on the one flesh and blood life form he knew that would willingly consent to being put through torture to study the effects poison had on the body. Himself. His way of testing was pretty simple. He would take some of his own poison, coat an arrow, and stick it into his own stomach or chest. He would then focus on suppressing his palate of the malefic viper and feel the effects of the poison as it moved uninhibited through his body. Jake actually had to praise himself for the method. It allowed him to not only practice sense of the malefic viper, but also his palate. Granted, it would likely be more effective to experiment on something that wasn't himself, and the pain he could do without, but besides that, it worked well. The next 3 days were spent exclusively in the cellar of the lodge without any disturbances. Jake did feel a bit bad about telling Sylvie that he couldn't play with her for a while, and he would have to move a dinner session with Miranda. She seemed oddly okay with that, so that had gone over easy. Jake felt like he needed to hammer when the iron was hot, and his inspiration from the fungus fight was still fresh in his mind. Over these days, Jake went through many bottles of necrotic poison and hemotoxin. While Jake had gone through the trial of myriad poisons, he had never truly pondered the effects poison had on his body and how exactly it worked on a deeper level. During those times, he had focused solely on fighting the poison, not actually understanding it. Breaking something apart was far more simple than learning how it worked, and that was exactly what Jake was currently doing. After inflicting himself with the poison, he entered a deep state of meditation and just sat there observing its effects, almost like an out-of-body experience. He filtered out all feedback that was not from sense of the malefic viper as he just looked on and learned. He saw his own body rot and decay, his blood thin, and the wounds left by the arrows bleed like never before. But more than that, he saw the toxic energies mix with the energies in his body and how the poison slowly eroded that energy. Jake couldn't help but sometimes momentarily compare the information from sense of the malefic viper to how he actually felt in his body. That was when he noticed something was off with how his own toxins worked on his body. They did damage to his body, that much was clear. However, there was an invisible barrier that stopped the poison from going deeper and doing more damage. Like the two energies simply didn't oppose each other, even if one was aligned to destroying vitality and the other was pure vital energy. Jake couldn't understand why the poison didn't work as it should. It didn't work like it had when he used it on the fungus either, and he felt like he was missing something important. He considered many options until a thought suddenly struck him. Why could he even feel the effects of the poison to begin with? He understood why he could feel something was poisoned. The skill did that, but not why he could better feel the poison he himself had inflicted. Why was it just what he inflicted and not any poison something suffered from? What separated poison he was the source of from anything else? With these thoughts, he focused on the barrier that seemed to be the cause of why his own poison didn't hurt him as much as it should. To do this, he activated a part of his palate to absorb some of the poison. It went effortlessly, as a big part of the poison was, of course, his own mana, so... Wait, am I really just a fucking idiot? It was so goddamn simple. It was so obvious why Jake could better feel his own poison. It included his own mana. It included a part of him. Every single point of mana, health, or stamina Jake ever used contained a part of himself in the sense that it reflected his own records. Even poison he didn't concoct still held some of his records just on account of him inflicting it. Even if it didn't contain any of his mana, it would still contain his will and intent. Pride of the Malefic Viper had made Jake aware that his own intentions held power and could affect the world, so it only made sense that any action he took infused a part of his intent into that action. It was absolutely minuscule, but it existed. It was like something clicked in his mind as suddenly everything became clearer. He felt the poison within his own body more vividly than ever as he got a notification. Sense of the Malefic Viper, epic. The Malefic Viper sought out many natural treasures on its path to power. It is only natural to learn to sense them. Having walked further on your path as an alchemist of the Malefic Viper, your senses for poisons and herbs only sharpen. Gives a passive ability to detect herbs and poisons in different forms and a strong feeling of their properties and affinities. Allows you to far better sense the poison you have inflicted. Allows the alchemist to far more easily detect affinities in the environment and detect areas optimal for cultivating herbs. Adds an increase to the effectiveness of Sense of the Malefic Viper based on perception. Upgraded to Sense of the Malefic Viper, Ancient. The Malefic Viper's greed for natural treasures is never-ending. You are following his path for your senses to see all that which you desire. Your desire for knowing the suffering you bring upon your foes has brought you even further down this path. Gives a passive ability to detect herbs and poisons in different forms and a strong feeling of their properties and affinities. Allows the alchemist to far more easily detect affinities in the environment and detect areas optimal for cultivating herbs. Massively improves your ability to sense the poison you have inflicted and its effects on any afflicted entities. Adds an increase to the effectiveness of Sense of the Malefic Viper based on perception. Passively provides 1 perception per level in Prodigious Alchemist of the Malefic Viper. May your gaze scour the multiverse for all that is rightfully yours. Ding! Profession Prodigious Alchemist of the Malefic Viper has reached level 94. Stat points allocated, plus 5 free points. Ding! Profession Prodigious Alchemist of the Malefic Viper has reached level 95. Stat points allocated, plus 5 free points. Jake basked in the feeling of his senses expanding, but he felt it wasn't enough. He felt like he had just touched upon something vital as he kept delving deeper into feeling the mana in his body and in the poison. His perception increased with the upgrade, but he felt like he needed more. He didn't hesitate to instantly throw all his free points into the stat. His senses sharpened even more, and he could see the mana even better. He raised his hand as a mana bolt began condensing. The mana bolt crackled with energy, as always, but Jake kept pushing more into it. Not just mana, but his will, all the while observing it as closely as possible with not only Sense of the Malefic Viper, but also his sphere and natural mana sense. For the longest time, Jake had wondered what truly separated pure mana from what he had named destructive mana. He knew it had something to do with how you shaped it, how you packaged the bolt, and perhaps more importantly, what you intended for it to do. And today, for the first time, he had passed a threshold that allowed him to sense them. Small purple or pink wisps of energy existed within the bolt, but not just in the bolt, but all the mana he had. He felt it within his body as he focused on it. His sphere of perception homed in on a single of the tiny wisps that were still invisible to the eye. Even with Jake's high perception, he couldn't see them with his eyes. Without his sphere and sense of the malefic viper allowing him to better detect mana affinities, he wouldn't have seen it. The bolt floating above his hand flickered as he amplified the energy of one of the wisps. He willed for it to grow in power, pumping in more and more mana. It kept growing in intensity as more of his mana was consumed, and Jake felt like he was slowly beginning to lose control. His body moved while his mind remained focused on the bolt. He jumped out of the cellar of his lodge and flew out of the door towards the pond. Every shred of his mind focused on stopping it from exploding. He barely managed to get out of the lodge, and just as he was about to release the bolt that was being overcharged with energy and becoming volatile, it stabilized. The discharge of mana resembling crackling lightning stopped. The bolt no longer pulsed with energy, but was now just floating there, looking like a light pink crystal. Jake saw that he had lost more than 1,000 mana to make this single bolt, nearly 10 times more than the strongest he had ever made prior. Jake moved his free hand and touched the stable, crystal-like bolt. His finger poked into it, and he felt the mana just flow around his skin. He waved his hand, and just like that, the bolt dispersed, turning into atmospheric mana. What was that? He asked himself, confused. The bolt felt so different than any he had ever made before. He felt like he understood it more than anything he had ever created, and that he could control it far more than any spell or skill he had ever used. That is what your pure mana is supposed to look like, a voice echoed out in his mind, as he felt the full attention of the malefic viper on him. I normally don't like giving advice, but for once I am going to be the wise old master. This one is actually quite important. Your mana is pure and unpolluted by any affinities or influences. Mana is by default uncolored and unaffected by anything. You can mix pure mana with any other mana affinity, and all it does is dilute the mana affinity, like when you mix purified water into a concoction. But what happens when pure mana reaches a level of concentration where it can no longer be called pure, where the intent within it makes it antithetical to its purity? When you force this mana that otherwise does not hold any predetermined function to make your will a reality, it stops being able to merge with pure mana like before. That is when pure mana ascends to become an affinity in itself. Affinities are partly defined by having inherent intent. As you know, dark mana inherently wants to consume other mana affinities. Light affinity mana wants to spread itself out as wide as possible, and earth affinity mana wants to consolidate and condense itself. The affinity you just created is one where you define this inherent want. It wants to do what you want it to do. You can call it Jake affinity if you want to, but we decided to just give it a unified name in the multiverse, even if the effects of this affinity vary widely from person to person. Anyway, Jake, this is the amalgamation of all that silly and extremely suboptimal training with mana you have done. Congratulations, you just discovered your arcane affinity. And almost as if prompted, he got a notification. Title earned, Prodigious Arcanist. Jake was a bit surprised, and he swiftly checked out the title, hoping it would make things more transparent. Jake was still a bit confused about what was happening, and the title should explain what this whole arcane affinity thing was about. Prodigious Arcanist. You have proven yourself a prodigy in the realm of energy manipulation and control. Create your own arcane affinity before reaching D grade. Allows you to transform energy into your arcane affinity far more easily. It didn't. Chapter 54. Cloudy with a Chance of Power Shots. Jake felt like he had to make a confession after hearing the Viper explain all that stuff about arcane mana and arcane affinity. He didn't get it. Not really. In particular, he didn't really get how he had somehow created this arcane affinity. Was it just because he wanted his pure mana to be better without compromising on purity? That he kept condensing his mana bolts instead of mixing in other affinities? Jake voiced his confusion, with the Viper trying to explain how it all worked a bit more in detail, but Jake just got more confused. He summoned some more of the pink-purple mana and played a bit with it, finding out that it was pretty much just like his pure mana, just more potent and more condensed. The Viper said that was because Jake's version of arcane mana was based on his intent of creating mana with stable destruction, or something like that. Jake got that part, as he had tried to make his pure mana better at destroying and breaking down things, while at the same time making it less likely to blow up in his face, but he wasn't sure how that constituted a mana affinity. Jake kept talking with the Viper until he made it clear that he was running out of divine message juice, and finished with a real nugget of wisdom. Jake, arcane mana better pure mana. Mana bolt go bigger boom boom, but not boom boom in Jake face. An obviously condescending explanation that Jake could only nod at, as it finally made at least some sense to him. Sure, the entire concept appeared simple enough, but that is why it was so confusing. Why would the system recognize something so simple as so extraordinary? Anyway, with that settled, Jake returned to the critical matter of calming down the sulking Sylphie that was sad he had locked himself away for 3 days. She kept angrily pecking his hand whenever he tried petting her, but got equally angry when he stopped trying. "Still a bit too young to go through your teenage phase, aren't you?" he joked. She had finally forgiven him and was nesting on his lap as he petted her. She was a real lap bird. He couldn't help but identify her and see that she was actually just about to exit her teenage levels. Sylphian Ias, level 19. All jokes aside, he wasn't actually sure how levels related to growth. Sylphie still couldn't even fly yet, despite having a relatively high level. Her physical specs were up there, though, with her pecs able to easily break rock and her wind magic quite impressive. The thought of her killing the big level 10 Iron Tusk boar back in the tutorial with a few pecs and by blowing a bit of wind was both absolutely hilarious and plausible. The little bird looked harmless, but he could see her killing even a level 25 human if he or she wasn't careful. But at least she was aware of it. While Jake wasn't sure she could break his skin with her pecs, she clearly didn't try to either. It was all playful, like how a cat didn't try to actually inflict any injury when it just nipped at someone. "Breathe!" the small bird yelled, making a noise that Jake wasn't entirely sure fit with being a hawk. She was just annoyed that Jake didn't give her as much attention as she thought she deserved. He was still too stuck in his head, as he couldn't help but think of ways to possibly apply this whole new arcane mana business to Touch of the Malefic Viper. The Viper had called it controlled destruction, or something like that, but Jake was focused on the controlled part. His current issue with trying to transmute objects with Touch of the Malefic Viper wasn't in the power department, but actually making his touch not destroy the item. Jake basically used mana in 2 ways, either as incredibly stable states to strengthen items or create almost tangible objects, such as his strings, or employing pure mana to cause pure destruction and damage. He didn't really have anything in between that. At least, that is what he used his pure mana control for. He hadn't tried to make mental magic, summon things that mimicked the living, or attempt any of that advanced magic circle stuff. He either just threw his mana as condensed bolts of destruction, or made things tougher. Infused Power Shot was a perfect example of this. Thinking back, wasn't that the first skill he'd truly upgraded on his own? Not counting the basic weapon skill upgrade for knowing how to use a bow, that is. He had done so by combining power and stability, making the bow more stable and able to contain the power his body would impose upon it. He'd made the 2 energies work in concert after that, mixing and creating a powerful strike. Like most of his other skills, it was straightforward, yet powerful. "Sylphie, I am sorry, but you'll have to spend the rest of the day with your parents. I'm going to have to go practice a bit on my own," he told the small hawk nestled up next to him, stroking the still-growing feathers that were slowly replacing all the down. He reckoned she would be able to fly soon. After a few more protests, he brought her out and gave her to Misty, who was just chilling outside with a small magic circle-looking thing. Yeah, he had kinda given up on learning advanced magic like that. Why make mana complicated? Just make it go big boom, or make yourself not be hurt by the big boom. Summoning his wings, he took flight and headed up to the clouds above. Passing the many small clouds on the way, he finally spotted the giant cloud island above. He even saw the small island where he and Hawkeye used to relax after their battles. It still floated there untouched. Jake shook his head before he found another island to land on. He was going to do a bit of practice, and the last time he practiced archery, he'd ended up destroying quite a few cloud islands along with his long-range takedown of the storm elemental. He summoned his wind-soar bow and looked down at it a bit. He felt the mana within, the majority of it inherent to the weapon, but a portion was his own. It was the connection that one created with any bound weapon. This connection bound the weapon to the person using it, but it also helped strengthen the item. Much like how a living being's body would weaken significantly after dying, so would a weapon be less durable when not bound. Not to the same degree, but to at least some extent. When he used infused power shot, he didn't just push mana into the weapon, but also flooded the bow's surroundings and the arrow he was about to fire. Mana and stamina would swirl around his entire body as he channeled, making him fire his most powerful attack. Jake had never really tried to improve this skill besides just pushing more energy into it. He was afraid of breaking the equilibrium that the skill required. Now, he was actively looking to break that equilibrium and allow the skill to evolve. He didn't have any way of making his stamina more potent or suddenly making his body more durable, but he felt like he had a way to make the mana stronger through his newly discovered arcane affinity. When he began making a few simple experiments, he quickly noticed that he was, in some ways, already halfway through this practice. His many days spent refining his mana and trying to create arrows infused with mana were very close to what he attempted right now. Jake stood up on the cloud platform and took out an arrow. In a slow movement, he knocked it and focused on every action as he began using infused power shot. But he kept the energy output to a minimum, not caring about charging time or power, just the process. He let go of the arrow a bit later before knocking another and starting over. Each arrow released was weak, but what was important was that he felt himself progress incredibly fast as something clicked. Slowly, his surroundings began to change. Faint wisps of pink-purple energy began mixing into the otherwise colorless mana, and he instantly felt like something shifted. It was like the axis determining the equilibrium moved. His stamina was immediately overwhelmed, and his body began taking the brunt force of the skill. His skin sizzled as his own mana began destroying the stamina coming out of his pores and burning into his flesh. Jake instantly focused, pushing the energy away from his skin and towards the bow and arrow. A bit reminiscent of when he used mana to walk on air or water, he tried to create a thin layer of mana over the stamina vapors coming out of his skin, making it flow towards his weapon and lessening the damage to his body. The wind-soar bow began being flooded with energy, and the arrow began to turn a purple color as it too experienced a faint influx of mana. It wasn't even because the arrow was directly infused, it was only affected by the remnant energies, but even that was enough to nearly make it break. As for the bow, it began to show strain, but managed to contain the energy. It was practically glowing with mana by the time Jake was forced to let go of the string. The usual explosion of mana and stamina from infused power shots sounded out, but was far more powerful than ever before. It wasn't colorless either, but had a faint pink-purple hue as the poor small cloud island beneath him was utterly destroyed by the arcane mana in a single shot. A notification appeared at the same time. Infused power shot, rare. Stamina as fuel, mana as a guide. Unlike a normal power shot, the infused power shot does not require a long charging time, but can be charged in a brief moment. The higher the magnitude of the charge, the greater the stamina and mana expenditure. Charging infused power shot may empower the skill further. Adds a small bonus to the effectiveness of agility, strength, and intelligence when using infused power shot. Upgraded to Arcane Power Shot, Epic. Stamina the fuel, mana the guide, arcane the power. Evolved from infused power shot, it now uses a higher concept of mana to amplify itself. The higher the magnitude of the charge, the greater the stamina and mana expenditure. Arcane Power Shot's power is dependent on the charging duration, but due to your arcane mana's inherent power, the base power without any charging is significantly higher than infused power shot. adds a small bonus to the effectiveness of agility and strength, as well as a medium bonus to the effectiveness of intelligence when using Arcane Power Shot. Jake smiled for a moment as he skimmed the notification before the pain hit. He only now noticed that while he thought he had avoided most of the damage caused by the arcane mana, he hadn't succeeded. Far from it. His arms had purple veins running through them, looking like he had been struck by lightning. It was only now that he noticed several bleeding wounds on his chest, and his shoulders especially had been hit hard. There were places where the arcane mana had gathered for a fraction of a second too long before being led to the bow, or at least away from his skin, causing these injuries that still sizzled with mana. Yet through all that pain, he kept smiling because, goddamn, was the arrow he had just sent flying into the horizon powerful. He took out a health potion and chugged it before finding a new small cloud island to sit on. He wanted to consider what he had just gone through a bit before heading back. Many ideas bounced around in his head as he considered how this new affinity could be used to make him stronger, and without really thinking much, he had already begun condensing an arcane bolt in the air. "Block it!" the warrior yelled as the large beast was just about to cleave his friend's head off. He swiftly came to the rescue and released the power shot he had been charging into the side of the beast. It snarled in response, but the arrow barely managed to penetrate its thick hide. The archer looked desperately around and saw that their healer was already struggling to keep their other warrior from bleeding out. The mage had managed to sear the long hairs of the overpowered beast in front of him, but nothing more. Truly, they had fucked up by invading the small clearing this beast and its kin occupied. He identified the absolute monster before them, one much more potent than its level would generally indicate. Alpha Venom Fang Badger, level 67. "Retreat!" he yelled as he fired another arrow, aiming for the eye of the badger. He just wanted it to leave the warrior alone and give him time to get back. The attack earlier had broken the warrior's arm,